Hi and welcome. This video is about editing for portrait photos. You may have been to one of my workshops locally in Ipswich or somewhere around there. You may just have stumbled across this video on YouTube, but it's about portrait editing in Lightroom and keeping it fairly simple, nothing too complicated, but this is what I do for my portrait shots. We're looking here at Danny. This was shot, I think it was probably about May 2025. Briefly, just talk about gear. It was shot with mostly my Nikon ZF and some shots on the Leica M10. The Nikon had 85mm lens on, and the Leica, I believe, had a 75 1.4 Summilux. Yes, so that was the gear. I did use some flash here and there, but mostly natural light. One of the things I would have talked about would have been background, and just to show you some examples, if we look at this shot here, the colour of the background is the predominant feature of the background. Other than the colour and a few highlights giving some bokeh, there's really nothing more to talk about as far as the background goes. Other times we've got some light in the background, as you can see here. So we've got colour plus some pretty strong sunlight coming through a hole in the tree there. Other times we've really got just the again just the background, which is quite dark and very, very blown out, and some light. We've got, let's have a look at this one a bit closer. We've got light in one half of the background and shadow in the other half, which gives just, there's no right and wrong. It gives an interesting background, and it does give us some backlighting for the portrait shot. In fact, let's stick with this one, and I'll go through the actual editing program. As you can see, we've got lots of other shots we could choose. We've got full body shots. Now, whether or not you call these a portrait shot or not is up to you. Maybe you only consider like this, you know, where it's mostly someone's face. Mainly, perhaps that's your view of a portrait shot, and this for you is not a portrait shot. But the dictionary defines a portrait shot as a person with their face in the photo. We would have talked about light in the background at some point, and as you can see here, we've got colour, but we've also got a lot of light in the background here as well, as opposed to this one where I'm not sure what I did with the exposure, but we've still got green, but not so much light in the background. And in one of these shots, I'm sure we've got some framing. Oh no, framing, I was going to talk about this shot here. So we've kind of got a bit of framing here. There weren't many opportunities to get other framing elements in this shoot. They just didn't exist in the location that we were at. Okay, so let's go back to that photo I said. Okay, so as you can see, this was shot on the Leica. Now, as the Leica is manual focus and has a very, very shallow depth of field, I better just check that we are in focus. Yep, we're okay. So straight out of camera, this is what it looked like. You'll notice I've got several presets up here, and depending on the shoot, the subject, the weather, and all sorts of things like that, I will choose one of these as a starting point. It's never just click and call that it, but I'm going to choose something called Wedding June 25, which I've just created for one of the weddings I did last weekend. And let me just go through what this is doing. And this is typical for what I would do for pretty much every photo of people that I do. First of all, the white balance is as shot okay, or would we prefer to have auto? And that's a completely personal choice. Would you prefer to have daylight? I'm going to stick with as shot. It looks okay to me. Might change my mind later, of course. The exposure is a bit bright, so let me just bring that down a bit. Now, you'll notice let me talk about the elephant in the room here. Blown highlights. Blown highlights in a portrait shot is just completely unacceptable. And if I click the button up here, we can look at the highlights and see if they're blown. And it's not until we lift the highlights to silly sort of levels up here that we start to get the red blown highlight indicator come up. So provided we're keeping the highlights pretty low, I don't think we're going to have a problem with highlights. The shadows, maybe I want to drop the shadows a bit more. We'll come on to that shortly. I always add a little bit of texture and a little bit of dehaze as a starting point. Again, that might change depending on the actual photo. Plus a little bit of vibrance, but no additional saturation. I think I don't do anything with the tone curve. No, the colour mixer I do some things with. Let's start with hue. Digital cameras tend to overemphasize green, and you'll see that as I go through this I try and scale that back a bit. First of all, change the hue of the green a little bit, the green and the yellow. Saturation I will drop quite a lot of the green because, as I say, digital cameras tend to overemphasize green, and the luminance I will also drop slightly as well, just so that the green isn't quite so much in your face. Now maybe this is a Nikon thing because that's my main camera I use. Leica I think probably has less of a problem with it, but that's all I will do as far as colours go. Colour grading, I don't do anything with that. Detail, I don't do any noise reduction whatsoever. It's a portrait shot. We're looking at 200 ISO. Shouldn't need any sort of luminance or colour noise reduction at all. Sharpening is just as it is in Lightroom always. Lens correction, yes, we want the lens correction enabled, and I'm not sure why this hasn't picked it up. So what we're using here, we're using, actually it's a Viltrox, where's it gone? I don't think it's actually, has it got it listed? Yes it has, Voigtlander, sorry, the Voigtlander. There we go. Now that said it's a wide 10mm. It was certainly not a wide 10mm. It's a 75 1.4. Let's choose. I'm not going to go spend a lot of time on that. Let me choose that one. But try and make sure that the correct lens is selected. Don't want anything else added. Grain, I don't actually want grain added. I'm not sure why that was there. So that's my starting point. Now Lightroom these days is very clever, and it's got some things which I think is worth embracing, and that's the AI features of masking. And what I do, let me take all the masking off and we'll go through that. So what this preset is doing is it's selecting the subject. Now this is not people, this is subject. If you select people, you'll see in a moment it does something completely different. But if you just select subject, it does an extremely good job these days of picking out subjects, even the bits of hair and all that kind of stuff. If you do see something which is not subject, but you want to get rid of, you would simply go to the subtract here, choose a brush and just brush over the bit you want removed, and that will remove it. Once you're happy that you've got the person only masked here, then I would go over here and do duplicate and invert the mask. So we're now going to select just the background. So we can now do two separate things with the background and the subject. If we go back to the subject, I would select a preset which I call, where's it gone? Flash Half Sharpen. So this is trying to give a little bit of pop to the subject. So it increases the exposure slightly, drops the highlights a bit more, lifts the shadows slightly, and I think gives a bit more texture, a little bit more clarity, and a little bit more sharpness. So it makes them pop against the background, because the background, if I select that, the preset I would use for that is Soften Skin, which basically just takes out detail. So it drops the clarity an enormous amount, so we've got a much more blurred background, and we haven't changed the exposure at all, but because we've lifted the exposure on the subject, there's now a bit more of an exposure difference between the subject and the background. There's a difference in sharpness between the subject and the background, and it just adds some more pop to the photo. There's one more thing I do to the subject, and that is I intersect the mask with a radial filter. Sorry, radial gradient. And what this does is, rather than apply that preset, the flash half sharpen, to the whole subject, as it's done here, I want it to really start to look like we've just used a flash. Now a flash would only, normally, you'd only apply a flash to the subject's face, maybe the top half kind of here. And that's the area that I want that mask to apply to. I'm not worried about sharpening up her forearm or her fingers or her dress down here. I want to sharpen up her face and sort of hair and that kind of thing. And I even want maybe some change in the level of exposure. I want the flash to be in this area here on this side of her face and dropping off on this side. And if I just overdo this, you'll see what I'm talking about. So if I raise the exposure and drop the shadows for this filter, you can see that we've now gone on. I better drop that back a bit. We'll take that off, take the clipping off. You can see that wherever I move this now, we've got what looks like would be a flash. So I've got the flash on from this direction on this side of her face. This side is more in shadow. If I change it to this side, we've lifted the shadows enormously on this side, and we're not having so much effect on this side. So, and the point is, it's only affecting our subject. It's having no effect whatsoever on the background. So if I put that where I think it should be, reduce exposure to something more reasonable. Now we are in danger of blowing out highlights here, so on this radial gradient I'm going to take out the drop the highlights, and I might lift the shadows somewhat as a way of replacing that. Right, so that's got our picture looking fairly reasonable now. Maybe still a little bit blown on the highlights, but there's one more thing we can do for a portrait shot. If we zoom in, that's probably a bit too much. Let's go to there. We've got a decent amount of detail, but can it be improved? Now, this is me. I don't mind wispy bits of hair across the face. Some photographers would have a nightmare. You've got, you know, one strand of hair across her face, and that's not me. I'm about reality, looking natural, but looking good. And there's some things here which I'm not too happy about. Her eye whites aren't particularly white. Her eyes, her iris, not quite as much pop as I would want maybe. Maybe her eyebrows could be a little bit more pronounced. And we've got a little bit of a shine here that I'd like to try and get rid of if we can. So the way we do that is to click on over here. I've got something called Portrait. And if I click on that, this will do it automatically. But what it's doing, it's gone back to the masking tool here, and it has this time selected people. And within people, it's now selected various masks that can apply to this person. And the masks it applies are, we'll run through them. So it applies a softened skin to her skin. So her skin now looks, if I take the mask off completely, if I drop the slider down, it would remove the effect completely. So it's now applied a softening to her skin. It is not as good as doing frequency separation in Photoshop and all that kind of thing. And maybe if someone was paying me a lot of money, I would still do frequency separation in Photoshop and that sort of thing. Its effect is somewhat better than this, but it's not a million times better. If you've got, you know, a portrait shoot where you've got 30-40 photos to do, you're not going to do frequency separation in Photoshop for each one of those. This comes pretty damn close. but just decide on the level that needs to be done. Let's call it there. Next one is eyebrows, and I said about making them a little bit darker. I use a preset called Emphasis, which drops the blacks, so makes them stand out a little bit more, and also increases the texture and clarity and dehaze for that preset. And again, that's probably a bit too much, so I'll drop that down. Okay, I'm happy with that. The next one is eye whites. Now, I did say that our eye whites were, I thought, a little bit on the red side. This is maybe a bit too bright, a bit too white. So again, I can either change the amount slider here or just simply drop the exposure. I think we'll just drop the exposure to something more reasonable, like that. The next one is going to be her iris and pupil, which it's easy to overdo that and make her look really weird, but I think that's probably good enough. Next one is lips, and again I think that's the Emphasis preset. I think that's probably a little bit too much as well. Is it? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think somewhere around about there. Mask 6 is for... Oh, Mask 6 is teeth, sorry. And obviously she hasn't got any teeth showing, so it's not going to do anything. Mask 7 is hair, and that will do a preset called, as you can imagine, hair, which lifts the highlights, lifts the shadows, and just tries to sort of make her hair stand out a little bit more. If I'd come out and drop that, as you can see, it's just popping some highlights on the back of her hair where there's some highlights anyway. So that is then what I would do, and I can run through a set of 30 or 40 portrait photos probably in just over an hour, and get them all looking pretty reasonable. Another thing I might do, if I just lift the whole exposure a little bit, is pop some vignette on, and I can change the amount of that up here, so maybe some vignette there. Now, sorry, something I forgot to do is if I go back to her face mask here, and I'm going to drop the highlights on her face. I've got the right one, haven't I? Yes. So that is the treatment I would do for all of my portrait shots. On some portrait shots it works absolutely brilliantly, on others it doesn't work particularly well. I haven't picked the best photo out of this shoot by any means, but I thought it'd be interesting to run through that. I hope you found it helpful. Oh, let's just finish off finally. I would then export that. The way I export that is to a specific folder. I would choose the folder, or I would choose the folder, maybe call it portraits, and put it into a subfolder called Danny. Rename it to a custom name, sequence, so I could call that Danny, and it will then add Danny 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc, etc. I always export, obviously JPEG, 100%, no limit on the file size, and it comes up automatically with this sRGB. I've never tried anything else. I've no idea what it does, to be honest. We do not resize it. I export at 300 pixels per inch. I don't bother with any sharpening. Include copyright only. I guess you can include other things there if you really wanted to. Yeah. And finally, I add a watermark, a little watermark that goes down in the bottom left-hand corner. That's it. I hope you found that useful, and thank you for watching.